Welcome everyone to Textiles and Tea with the Handweavers Guild of America. I'm Kathy Group, I'm the advertising manager, and I get to be your host today. We are so excited to have Dell Christie be our sponsor today. I'm proud to say she's in my guild, but we appreciate Dell stepping up and being a sponsor of Textiles and Tea today. It's really nice as an individual that you do that. Thank you, Dell. We appreciate it. As always, we will take questions at the end of the program. They're the last 15 minutes of the program, but please put them in the Q&A and not in the chat. It's really hard to see them when they're in the chat. So if you would just put them in the Q&A and I'll get to as many of those as I can. Today, we are excited to have Vandana Jain today. Vandana is an artist and textile designer based in Brooklyn, New York. She received her bachelor's degree from New York University and studied at the Textile Design at the Fashion Institute of Technology. After working in the industry for many years, she works for Intertwine Arts, teaching weaving to people with cognitive and physical disabilities. Recently, she started making weavings and sculptures with found materials, both on and off the loom. She's interested in what we value as a society and individuals, and how this intersects with craft and art. Vandana's work has been exhibited both nationally and internationally. Her work has been profiled in Artforum, the New York Times, Slant, and Mumbai Boss. Kyoorius and Beautiful Decay. She was a visual arts resident at Pioneer Works, Brooklyn in the fall of 2023. Hi.
Hi, Kathy. How are you?
I am good. We're excited you're here.
Thanks for having me.
Well, the very important question first, what is your favorite tea?
This is such a hard one to answer because it's hard to have favorites. My favorite esoteric tea would be pu'er. I don't know if you've ever had pu'er. It's from China.
No.
It's a fermented tea. It's a very, very earthy. And there's something I just loved about it the first time I ever had it.
Wow.
It's a whole like deep dive into tea drinking, and you can buy sampler sets and figure out which one's your favorite. But then we have the everyday heavy hauler, which is an Irish breakfast. Just
Ah,
has the
okay.
right amount of caffeine to get me through, usually 2 cups a day. But
I think
yeah.
that's a first for us, Irish breakfast.
Ooh.
Congratulations. That's an honor.
Thank you.
Excuse me. So how did you get started in fiber? I know you went to art school. Was it before then or while you were in school or?
I mean, so it's a combination of both. I was always very crafty as a kid. I was born in the US, but I visited my family in India quite a bit, and all of my aunts did something. They all sewed, they did like hand painting, silk painting. I had a cousin who taught me how to tat when I was about 7. I think I actually, by the time I really figured it out, I was a little older, but it was like 2 summers later and I'd been practicing and I was like, okay, now I understand. And then I learned how to make friendship bracelets when that was a big thing in junior high. So I always had like this desire to like make stuff, and especially like things with thread. And as I ended up going to art school, but I ended up going for photography. I never really thought about craft
Oh,
as something I could do. But I started getting into the arts sort of like the end of high school, and I was taking a lot of pictures, and I was like, oh, well, this sort of makes sense. Let me pursue that. And then I had been introduced to weaving, but it was really when I had when I had realized that an art degree was going to get me a job as a security guard at the Met and then a gallery assistant. And I found the program at FIT, which was a 1-year certificate program in surface design. So I did that, and I learned I learned everything about shaft weaving there. And it really was such a deep and wonderful introduction, and I just have loved it ever since. I'm like definitely one of those people who sat down at a loom and was like, "Oh wow, I know this. How did this happen?" And have kept that going my whole life.
so was being on a loom part of the curriculum, even though it was surface design?
Yes, so we
Oh,
had
okay.
printmaking and we also had weaving, and I believe there was a third. I think we did some silk painting as well. It was sort of transitional. Like, of course, I never did any hand painting or weaving for any of my work, but we were still being taught that because it was FIT and they really felt like you needed those hand skills, even though it was all Photoshop and Illustrator and Pointe and, you know, fake like woven simulators and stuff. So I'm really grateful I had that opportunity because it really introduced me to just such a big part of my life now.
We're grateful too. Way to go, FIT.
It's a great school.
Well, you use materials you find on the streets of Brooklyn. You say they're free. First, I want you to describe how all that works. And then what drew you to using found objects?
Well, so really, I had just a bit of a long story. I'm trying to figure out where best to start. In 2019, I ended up getting a loom back that I had given away. It's a giant Maycomber. It's like a 56-inch 12 harness. And I had gotten rid of it because I live in New York and I had to move into a smaller apartment and I found a new home for it and I lived there for a long time. But in 2019, I had a bigger space. I have a studio at in the Brooklyn Army Terminal. And the person who had the loom was moving on to like a different job and she was ready to let go of it. So it ended up coming back to me. And that's sort of when I started weaving again. And I had already had like this art practice where I was working a lot with consumerism and like the artifacts of like things we buy. So it kind of just came naturally to want to use non-traditional materials. So at first I was just using things like bubble wrap or like just things I had in the studio just to see what they would do. But once the pandemic happened, I just kept coming across all these free piles because people were trying to make space in their houses for classrooms, for their children, for their now home office, for all this stuff. So there was like a lot of material. And also, I was walking, I don't know, about 2 or 3 hours a day. So also it's you know, I just felt like it was such a weird moment of pause and like things really reorganized. And for me, what that looked like, I was doing a lot of I had lost my job. They restructured. I was unemployed. I was walking for hours. I'd come back when I needed to use the bathroom, then go out again a couple of hours later. And something that I would continually see would just be all this stuff on the street. And it was a lot of it was yarn. Sometimes it was craft material, sometimes it'd be fabric, sometimes it'd be like mylar balloons or banners. So it just sort of started feeding into like what I was already doing and being and thinking about. And again, going back to this question of like, why are these things being cast off? Like someone doesn't want to throw them away. They're sort of saving them for someone else to maybe reuse them. And that person would be me.
Absolutely. So when you're repurposing, when you're weaving, do you purchase other materials such as like yarn or something? And if the answer is no, do you ever find it limiting or frustrating to only use what you find? Or you find that a challenge? And if the answer is yes, how do you determine how much of to buy and how much to use the found?
That's a really great question. I usually buy my warp. So
Mm,
that's sort of where I let myself like either I just kind of like define what the weaving's gonna look like because I think the warp is very structural. Um, at first I was just using like 8/4 Mayville's cotton, which is also very affordable, ecological. But then found a lovely gradient yarn that like Hobby makes these lovely cakes. So I was really interested in sort of having the color shift happen. So I would buy that for my warp material. Um, but in terms of the limitations, or one thing about weaving that is so interesting is that there are always limitations,
mm,
I find, in the sense that, like, if you were a painter, you could mix your color, right? But as a weaver, we're constantly having to fill that gap of like the right yarn material with the right color. And a lot of times I'm always struggling with that and trying to find that.
mm.
One thing that I let myself do when I'm working on a weaving is sometimes I really want like a little bit of color. And it allows me to actually, instead of finding it limiting, I try and find play in it to see what I have that has that color. And then maybe I just cut it into strips. Maybe it's a giant thing of rope that just gets smushed in. It's so in a way that I try and expand that limitation to let it become something new that I wouldn't have done otherwise.
Mm-hmm. Well, this piece that we're going to look at right now is called Landscape. And it has a great contrast of plain weave with, for lack of a better term, 3D accents. So would you talk about your work and your approach to inlay?
Sure. So one thing is that when I do start these on the loom, I usually don't know what I'm going to do. I might have assembled some materials that I'm really excited by and think look nice together. So in this case, I had all of this orange rope that I had gotten from, we have this big warehouse called Materials for the Arts in New York City, which is accessible. If you're like part of a nonprofit, you can go and shop their warehouse and everything is free. And they get a lot of amazing things from like the theater district and stuff. So anyway, there was like a ton of this orange rope and I loved this color and I loved like the thickness of this cotton rope. So I had a lot of it lying around and I was so excited to see what I could do with it. So I kind of started there. And then as the piece started building up, other things would happen. And one thing that's interesting is this one I was really trying to slow myself down with the weaving and really leave space for the elements to breathe, which I think I really like the end result of. But yeah, and the inlay is sort of something I just discovered working with these materials is that sometimes I needed to let them breathe a little. So instead of using the shafts the way they normally would, I just sort of do a pickup. So I instead of if I have a 4 shaft weave, I might pick up every 12th string just to make that work. Or even I could change I could introduce it into the weave pattern if I thought about it, but I usually just improvise on the loom. And then sometimes I will add things on later. So like the circle weaving is added a little later. I had some of this chenille warp that you see falling from the bottom center around that little white circle. Some of that was coming from the ends of the chenille that I was using. And then I liked it so much, I kind of wanted to mimic it on the other side as well. So I definitely do have a lot of consideration when I'm making a piece as to how things look, and I'm not opposed to adding a little stitch here to make something be where I want it to be.
So what is that up in the circle? It's so shiny.
So that's sequins, threaded sequins.
Did you
They
sew them in or glue them on or?
they come on a string and you can get them at like Notion stores, and there are a lot
Uh-huh.
all over the fashion district here, but they were also fined for Materials for the Arts because a lot of the stores have been closing, and especially during the pandemic. So sometimes they'll just be like 50 spools of sequins. So it's hard because you can't actually accommodate that much material, but sometimes they'll just wind off a little bit. I'll either take 2 spools or like wind off a little bit because I really like the color or I want to play with it. So yeah, and I had this bike cable that my dad had kept forever, and I have these strange memories from using it as a kid. And it's sort of like this, like wire wrapped inside a plastic. So I
Mm-hmm.
kind of thought to like create the space inside with the sequins.
So how big is this piece? Somebody's already asking that. Thank you,
Ooh.
Terry.
Yeah, that's a good question. Let me see. I think it's about 4 feet wide, so that would make it about 3 feet tall.
Okay. And was this done on a frame loom or a floor loom or?
This was done on the floor loom.
Okay. Well, this next peak we're going to look at is called Longing Belonging. And it's interesting because you've used materials that you've found. But when I was looking at this, I wondered what is more important to you, the recycling or the interesting images that you find? Or is it both from time to time?
Well, I think a lot of it also with using the found materials is I kind of want to talk about the world we live in a little bit. It's like for me, it's like making artwork is never just coming from an interior space, it's sort of the dialoguing with the world around me. So what, a lot of the experiments that I was doing with weaving earlier, I was working more on a Cricut loom and doing a couple of big pieces, but I was working a lot with packaging and just sort of cutting it into strips and like recreating the package. And there was something interesting to me about that, like sort of thinking about like remaking the world, or I don't know, how do we sort of interweave with the world around us? So in this weaving, I'm using a basmati bag right at the top, which you can sort of see says Royal Basmati bag. And I kind of liked working with it. It's very, very dusty to work with burlap, but I kind of love how ubiquitous these bags used to be. Now they're kind of more plastic, but they used to just be jute or burlap or just printed right on. And it was so, you could just kind of like rip open the seam on the side and it flattens out. And I was like, oh, I wonder what this would look like. So there's a lot of experimentation and play in my work. So I'm just like, let's try it. This width of this bag is just a tiny bit wider than the tapestry I'm working on. Maybe it'll be the perfect top for it. And then underneath, the image that we're seeing underneath is actually a painting by my partner, Mike Esterbrook, who's also an artist. And I had really been working so much with images. I wanted to work with a painting. And I asked him if I could have something, and he gave me a study that he had done. And I was like, I have to cut it up. Are you okay with that? And he was. And we both, I find the effect, I think we have details of this too. I love the effect that this creates.
Yeah, Mandy, can we go to the next image?
And so there was something really
There we
exciting to
go.
me again about this, especially because, my partner made it and to sort of take it apart, but then to bring it back together again, kind of felt really powerful to me. And that's something that we've been exploring together. We did a collaborations. We just are finishing up a series of 8 works where he's making paintings and I'm incorporating them into weavings. And we'll be showing that in open studios this coming weekend, actually. So I'm just finishing up the last 2.
Oh, wow. Okay, all you people in the New York area, go see that for all of us who aren't. We want to see what that looks like. So was this just kind of like Theo Mormon where it's laid on top of a back
Yeah,
of the
yeah,
necklace
but
or
I didn't work with a Theo Mormon normally requires additional thin threads.
uh-huh.
So again, I'm more improvisational and sometimes I just make it work. So I just inlaid them in. But what I oftentimes will do, I don't know if I needed to do this here, but the backing material needs to be the same width as the strips that I'm cutting. So it needs some kind of support there, is what I've found to be most successful. And that's how I get away with it. And again, I might have done like I might have like raised up less threads if I could get away with it, or just used a pickup stick to
Mhm.
pick up less threads, like raise up the 4th shaft, but then just pick up every other one.
Well, this is amazing. Now, this was kind of going to be this next question because we also have another close-up of the top of it, I believe. Yeah, there we go.
Yeah.
Again, where you cut the burlap and then replaced it. Um, and it looks like you worked very hard to reconstruct it so it looks like it was before it was cut. What was the importance of that rather than just weaving it in some way?
Well, I was just curious to see how much of it would work and how much of it wouldn't. And there's something also just to me like really exciting about the way that weaving can kind of break up an image like this.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I'm not sure. This was so incredibly dusty and difficult to do because all the threads are so loosely woven, it would just like
Oh,
pull out. So you can see that it's like fringing at the bottom. I ended up saving a lot of the threads and making another smaller piece from it as well, where they're not in order and it's just sort of like randomized blue, navy blue and bright red and a little bit of white. But yeah, there's something I really I didn't want to lose the content of the material, you know, like what it actually was. Like, so I wanted to keep that, even though I was creating something new.
I was struck by it was kind of like fun when I realized, oh, that's a picture of something. At first it was just, light and dark. And then the more I focused on it, it was like, oh, that's a thing and I recognize it. So it was kind of fun from my point of view.
I think for me there's a lot I need to have some level of like play. So I like to not exactly know what's gonna happen because that's what keeps me coming back. Another thing I wanted to point out in this slide is on the black, I'm using a technique called split shed weaving. And I'm struggling to remember the name of the book, but we had just had the person who wrote the book on split shed weaving. It's a really incredible book and a lovely technique, had just spoken at the Guild. And I was so excited to try it out again because it allows you to sort of do tapestry techniques on a
Uh-huh.
floor loom a little bit faster and be improvisational.
I just took her workshop. It's Beverly Silver. Yes.
Deborah Silver.
Deborah
Thank
Silver.
you
Yeah.
so much, Marjorie. I really appreciate that. I had a Deborah in mind, but I couldn't get the right last name. So I'm sorry, Deborah.
No, that's great. Yeah, that was an amazing workshop. And it's interesting that that's what you did. That's a brilliant way to work with this materials.
Yeah.
So this is the next one. It's called A Study in RGB Parts 4. Four parts. And this is tape on a wall, correct?
Yes.
So it's like an installation.
Yep.
And I have to tell everybody that when they go to your website, you do all kinds of modalities. I mean, there's print and paint and it just goes on and on. But so I was kind of looking at all the different things that you did, and I was struck by, even though this is not weaving, it just feels weaving like.
Hmm.
Was that on purpose? Did one lead to the other?
I think that it's just sort of like when you're interested in things that parallel one another. So I think a lot of the things that are intersecting here are just like I love math. I love the way that things come together. And this whole series was sort of based on taking corporate logos and applying striping patterns to them based on like kind of camouflage pattern called
Uh-huh.
dazzle camouflage. But I was really interested in how things would overlay. So again, it has a lot of relevance to weaving because if I wanted to, I could probably take it and make it into a double weave or think it through in a woven fashion as well. But when I was working with the tape, a lot of times it was more just like about overlaying because to actually have to weave the tape would have been much more difficult. So because of the nature of the material, it was slightly different in that I was using an X-Acto and a ruler on top to sort of give me straight lines, to cut the tape and to give me straight lines, rather than in weaving where I'd be able to sort of just choose where I would switch from one layer to another. But yeah, that's a really good thing. I haven't really thought too much about those intersections, but they definitely occur quite a bit.
So what is the logo that you've used here?
This piece was done in the Republic of Georgia, so I was investigating logos that were based there. The three blocks, I believe, were a telecommunications company, and the M was from their metro. So they were kind of
Well,
designed on site and then installed for, they have like an international show that happens every year, and yeah, and so they were installed on site.
well, I have to compliment you on two levels. One, the visual. It's enticing. I mean, I can just kind of look at it forever and see what it does. But just the making of it, how precise it is. It's amazing that you can do that. Um, Now,
But
this is from a person who could never in a million years do that. So I am very, very impressed. You have my admiration for that piece.
thank
Um,
you.
Now, this is another where you use found objects for weaving. This is the onion bag. I loved this. And again, there was something about saying, oh, I know what that is. I don't know why, but there was just something like, oh, an onion bag. I know what that is. Um, so I was
Um,
curious because there's a lot of direction with the labels, the very strong up, the very strong horizontal. So when you're designing, how do you do that? Do you have to lay things out to figure out? Are you okay with like undoing whatever you've done because it just didn't work? So talk some about designing with this kind of material.
Definitely. These are onion bags that my mom buys onions in bulk because in Indian cuisine we use onions a lot, but I'm still amazed at how many bags that she goes through. But I was really interested in all this mesh that we're surrounded by.
Hmm.
I think a lot of it is leno. I keep like looking at it and trying to figure it out, and it's just fascinating to me. So she was collecting bags for me, and I was trying to figure out what to do. And I kind of just wanted to play around with it as like create like a substrate on which to add other stuff to. And she had these two different brands, and I love the way the colors work together. So I was like, why not pretend it's a weaving? So when I was just cutting them apart and putting them back together, I just wanted to play with that. And then it became just this perfect way to sort of try, it sort of becomes a repository for all these other things that I'm working with at the time. Like, so you can see that there's like these arrowheads that I created from raya knots right next to the bottom part of the onions to the left-hand side.
You created them from what?
So they're raya knots, but they're created from like
Orion nuts.
waste warp, right? So I had a warp that I had made, and there's always that 6 to 8 inches, and it's so perfectly organized. But when are you ever going to use it again? Um, so it was like, again, sort of the just having, letting that like little bit of play happen in the studio and just going in and being like, oh wait, I could do this with it, or what happens if I do that with it? So there's a lot of that in the work, using some embroidery, using it as a basis for cross stitch, doing the eye. It's almost like tapestry in the sense that except that I'm not weaving it all at the same time, right? I'm actually embroidering it. But for me,
Mhm.
I often think about how embroidery and weaving are just kind of only slightly separated from each other. Sometimes like it's just like the element of time that separates them. Because when you're doing tapestry, it's like happening all at the same time as the mesh. Whereas when you're doing embroidery, you're kind of working on top of a mesh. So anyway, like these are the sorts of thoughts I have when I'm working on a piece like this. And then I found this amazing little stuffed bone that you see. I don't know if it's a bone, but I have no idea what this was. I was walking down the street and all of a sudden I find this amazing rainbow holographic black arced stuffed thing on the street. And I was like, oh, this would be perfect for my piece. So this is, again, I think there's so much, I just find so much joy in being able to work this way when it works. And it does make me slow down a little bit, like, these pieces, which I think of as accumulations,
Mhm.
take a lot longer because sometimes they'll be in the studio and I'll kind of get to them like every couple of weeks or maybe in a month or two, just kind of when I have something new and that I want to play with. And sometimes that'll be like an old shirt or, some new warp I just cut off or something that comes from somewhere else in my life.
One thing else I like about this piece is that, and this is going to art school, this was the big thing, but I still do this today, is I try to think about how my eye travels when I look at a piece. And that's one thing I like about how the yellow brings you up, and then there's a little yellow off to the right, and then the red takes you around. And this piece really, to me, is very active. Your eye is going everywhere and looking at a variety of things when you look at this. So it's just very inviting.
Thank you.
Um, You are also interested in the systems of value. I read this on your website and I thought it was really interesting that you said that you wondered about how cheap it is to buy a mylar balloon, but like our birthday banner, but that how expensive it is to knit a sweater. So I want you to talk some more about the value and what you mean by that statement. And we're going to look at a piece that has the mylar balloon in it while you're talking, if you don't mind.
So this is one of the first large tapestries I made, and it reminds me so much of that time in the pandemic. But yeah, I mean, it's especially as a weaver, you think a lot about how people must have done things at a different time when you had to like grow your linen and red it and spin it and then dye it and then weave it, and then just the value that everything had, every little scrap, whether it was that little bit of waste warp or it was a piece of linen that had torn and would now become a rag, like, or a rag rug, like, so there's something inherent about thinking about use and value as a weaver. But then I think my work is always really kind of centered around consumerism and capitalism and just money and currency, and just again, like, how do we, what is the world we live in, and what are the things it values, and what are the things we want to value, and where is the divide between the two? So there's, it's the question, I think, is really, it's just something that I'm always trying to like parse out in my work, and I don't have any easy answers. I think the we live in a really fast world, and it's, of course, we want things cheap and we want them fast and we want them to be good, but there's always going to be something that's lost. But I think about how much connection maybe we're losing with ourselves, with the material world around us, about being able to do simple things like knitting a hat, or like, maybe weaving a dish towel is a bit more esoteric. But but our connection with the land, with the seasons, with these sorts of things are, I guess, sort of at the core of that that kind of line, which seems almost like a little like flippant, like, but to me it's sort of like, sometimes, how do we address this? Because it's such a big part of the world we live in. And again, like, so much of the stuff I find is just ready. It's somewhere that someone bought it and didn't want it and then got rid of it, or like they threw it away and I can still find a use for it. And what does that mean? Like, what does it mean to value the things we discard? So, lots of things for me to think about there. I'm always intrigued in how other people see that question too.
Where did that start for you, that questioning and wondering about materials and wanting to recycle? Where do you think that started for you?
Well, I used to visit India a lot when I was younger, and it was in the 80s. And my parents are from a very small town. It's just, it's like 20,000 people. But in India, that's kind of small. It wasn't like a big metropolis like Bombay or Delhi, and it wasn't like a industrial city like Indore. It was Shajapur. And we didn't have plastic. So I was like, I was a kid, I'd go get candy at the shop down the street, and it would come in like a glass jar, and the guy would just like dip his hands in and pull some out and put them in like yesterday's newspaper, right? And like give it to you. The same thing with like rice. It's just so like, I don't, there were so many different ways of doing things. Like, you could never just take a Coke and walk down. We didn't have Coke, we had Thumbs Up back then. But it came in a glass bottle and you had to drink it right there, or pay, leave a deposit of a significant amount and bring it back, right? So we used to have this kind of circularity like built in, which we've really moved away from, and it's hard to go back. Like, it's really hard to roll back convenience.
Mhm.
And it's but at the same time, I think it does come at a cost, and a huge environmental cost, but also I think a labor cost. So again, it's like when we think about these questions of value, it's like, what have we left behind to have mass production, to have convenience? And what's the balance, right? Like, it's not like we have to go back to living a hard life with like this harsh linen, like we can have a little bit of both now, but like, how do we choose to do that? How do we choose to move forward in a way where we can do that with some foresight rather than just like never ending progress, never ending trash, never ending consumption?
Yeah, I'm always struck, and I'm probably showing my age, but growing up, you got clothes twice a year. When school started, and some there may be something at Christmas. And I'm just amazed now that, some people buy clothes every week. Every week. They go to the mall and they get something, or whether it's a big box store or whatever. And that was such the norm for so long. And it's amazing how now people are starting to pull back a little bit and go, maybe that's not quite what we should be doing. So it's just funny how the norm can change. And I think your work helps people to think about the norm and doesn't need to change, of using something over and over again.
And I think it just goes back to again, once you realize like how different something that's hand woven is, just how much longer a dish towel will last you. When you learn how to do visible mending, you can keep your clothes going longer, right? It's just also kind of appreciating that longevity as well. So you don't buy fast fashion because you're like, that's only gonna last me like 4 months, that's not gonna be so, like, you start to think about things like that, and hopefully, yeah, hopefully we can sort of, kind of create more space for that to happen, be accessible for people.
Well, I want to shift gears a little bit here and talk again about the variety of work that you do. And this next image is kind of juxtaposition two kinds of works that you do. And this is a side by side of a weaving that you've made and a wall mural that you made. And I love showing both of them because to me they're at each end of the continuum. On the left we have the soft organic sculpture. On the right we have the hard edge, well-defined, wall mural. So I just think it's amazing how they're so different, and they're by the same person. So how do you go from one extreme to the other? How is that part of your repertoire?
Well, I spent a long time I don't know, I think it's just I think for me, it's every thought has its own expression. So, partially, it's when I'm making the mural, I'm working with different logos, I'm working with text and slogans. I know it's going to be painted on a wall, so it makes sense for it to be graphic, but I'm also bringing all of the skills that I learned as a surface designer to
Mhm.
it, right? Like there's this patterning happening in the background. I'm thinking about my color palette. So in a sense, it's very much coming from that kind of advertising space, this commercial space, and what I'm trying to do is like subvert that by creating, a slogan that makes you think like it's not just selling you Pepsi. So you have to think a little bit and be like, what is this trying to sell me? So again, I think that that piece kind of needs that to live in that space. And then, as I was saying earlier, when I got my loom back in 2019, it sort of happened at the same time. I had had a really big show in Buffalo in 2018, I believe, and it was really incredible. But it also kind of left me feeling like I was at the end of this body of work that I had been making, where I'd been working
Hmm.
with a lot of hard edges, where everything was sort of in this space that was a bit ironic. Maybe you're not quite sure what it was. A lot of times, also, I felt like I was designing the work and then executing it. And again, that was kind of dovetailing with my day job and like it made a lot of sense. But by that show, I kind of felt like I feel like I'm done with this. Like I've done a great job and I love this, but I can't do it anymore. And I spent like a year just playing around like assemblage and just putting stuff together, doing a lot of collage, doing a lot of sewing. Like, I have a box full of experiments. And by the time my loom came back to me, I had already been working on a cricket loom. And I think this piece that we're looking at here on the left, Sail Away, was from this period. So I was just like, oh, wait. And I realized just how much fun I had with weaving, right? I think before when I had been weaving, when I had been introduced to it, I thought of it as a craft, as a way to make clothing, to make home textiles, right? I was very much thinking about weaving as like with an end use. Now I had like sort of the headspace to think about weaving as an art form and also about what the process meant for me. So I really just loved the tactility of it. I loved how every line, even if it was a mistake, could kind of really be evocative for me if it spoke stronger. And I think I really indulged in that. And I found that I really liked this way of working. And I found ways of kind of bringing the themes that I was working with back in by using these found materials and unexpected, like I think that's a soap dish from a 99-cent store, just like little bits of things that, maybe I've had like stuff lying around forever or just haven't found a use for it or someone just threw something away. Again, they just end up in here. And for me, they just I felt like they were really feeding me in a way that the other work had stopped. So yeah, it ended up it's almost like a linear shift. And I still do sometimes get asked to do like for instance, I went back to Lithuania to make some more murals a couple of years ago. And I still love working that way. But I like not having to always work that way. Like I like being able to like just play with color and texture and yarn. And I recently learned how to, I'm still like spinning with a hand spindle, but I'm spinning now. And like, it's just a
Mhm.
completely different way of like, of being, and making art and thinking about the world. And I really love it.
Well, Liz Adams is harassing me about size. So, and I understand it does make things, you can
Yeah.
understand them a little more. So we get an idea of the size of that mural, but the piece that was next to it, about how big was that?
So that's on a 10-inch Cricut loom. So by the time it shrinks down, it's probably 8.5 inches wide. And I'd
Uh-huh.
say, I don't know, maybe a foot, like 13 inches tall.
Right, right. And then the tape piece, how big was
Sure.
that? That was pretty tall, wasn't it?
That was like maybe 4 by 4, three and a half
Oh,
by three
really?
and a half or 4 by 4. Yeah.
Okay.
So
All right. All right. I'll try to remember to ask well, we're done with images, but that's important
yeah,
to ask. And you never know, you can just see them and you never have any idea of, how big is it? So,
it's true. I mean, the only other one would be the onions, the Paras onions one. And that was also, I'm trying to think like about 32 inches by like
uh-huh.
about 42 inches.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks, Liz. Appreciate it. So what's next for you?
Um, so Mike and I just finished up this collaboration or I'm finishing two more pieces, but hopefully by this weekend. And recently I did a work where I took an old piece of clothing of mine that it was an old hoodie and I had kind of taken apart bits of it to use as fabric. So what I had left was just the hood, the zipper, and like the bottom hem and the pockets. And I kind of embroidered on it and added like pearls and like all these beads and like chandelier beads and like some hair and vertebrae. Like I was like becoming something else, very like ritualistic. And again, kind of going back to this like notion of accumulation and like stitching. So I'm kind of interested in like pursuing that a little bit more.
Hmm.
And then next on the loom, I'm actually I'm not sure. I just got a big piece off. Sometimes when I take a big piece off, like it might have 3 or 4 weavings in it, and I just have to let it sit for a little while before I know what's going to happen next. So
Mm.
it's still kind of in that zone. I've taken photos of it, I've looked at it, I'm going to see where it goes, and then I'll usually decide what's next on the big loom.
So tell us again about this weekend. If somebody wanted to know where to go, is that on your website?
The best place to look would be my Instagram,
Okay.
and it is happening in Sunset Park. There's a Sunset Park's Open Studios is happening.
Okay.
I'm on at the Brooklyn Army Terminal. There are quite a few studios there if you do make it down there. There's a ferry terminal there. There's also a food and wine festival I just found out happening there as well.
Oh, it's quite a weekend
So
then. Yeah,
yeah, and it's also Sheep and Wool Festival here. So unfortunately, I'm gonna miss some people due to that. It's a busy fall weekend,
it
unfortunately.
is. It is.
Yeah. But I'm excited. I have two new bodies of work up. I have the work, the collaboration, and then I have another series of very small works. I'm still working on the title, but it's like an accumulation of material poetics. But they're kind of very small experimental pieces I'm doing, working with like weaving and embroidery on found materials. Like again, working a lot with mesh and like the sort of packaging that we're constantly seeing, but a lot of, yeah. I'm interested to see what people think.
Well, do you do any teaching?
I teach mostly with Intertwine Arts. So I'm mostly working with people with physical disabilities or cognitive disabilities. So I'm teaching primarily weaving. We work a lot with cardboard looms and we work with Saori looms and we work with Cricut looms. But it's kind of great because teaching really like, I don't know, it makes me really improvisational. There's something about teaching where you're always like looking for the one thing you don't have and you just have to figure out how to make it up. Or you're trying to explain something to someone and you have to find another way of explaining it, right? So I kind of like that. It keeps me on my toes.
I was just thinking how much fun a class would be of, you know, found objects. What are you going to make out of it? That kind of thing. So
Yeah, that's a
it
great
just sounded
idea.
like, I hope you'll consider expanding your audience and teaching more.
I love it. I should like do a plan. I think that would be a good like weekend workshop or something.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That would be great. And I know people get mad at me because I always say convergence, but think about convergence.
You have to say convergence. I mean,
I mean, that's where, you know, we all want to go and learn and
I
play
know.
and have fun. Somebody else has asked, this is from Karen LeBlanc. I actually got to see Karen LeBlanc. Hi, Karen. I'm so excited. Can you talk about where you exhibit and or sell your work? Or are you more of a project-based artist? If you're a project-based, do you acquire funding for your projects? Good question.
Really good question. And I think I moved away from being a project-based artist. I would mostly get fundings from different institutions that I was working with. I did win a couple of grants that were really incredible. Usually everything is by recommendation. I was applying for a lot of stuff as well, but a lot of times what happens is people on the jury sort of start to see your work and follow your work and invite you to be part of their projects, and that's really how things start to happen. And I had been exhibiting that body of, that whole trajectory of work for about 15 to 20 years. So eventually you'll get a show at an institution, they'll tell you what their budget is and you'll work with that. Um, I don't have a gallery currently. My gallery, I was with a space and they went up to Toronto, but I am looking for a space. I was in residence last fall at Pioneer Works, which is like a music venue with a art residency program and like a great science program, and it's located in Red Hook in Brooklyn. And it was really great to have a studio there because they also do open studios every month. So while I was in residence, it was really nice to have, and one of the reasons I applied to be there was to just have a lot of people come through because I was still really new at weaving. I've been making art forever, but this type of way of working was really new, and I really was wanted a lot of feedback just to see what people responded to, and also where I was, where was that happening? Like where was I and where were they? Where was the intersection? Um, but yeah, so I'm still looking at different spaces and talking to different people, and hopefully we'll find a space to exhibit more.
Well, somebody is asking, and I know you said this, but if you would again talk about your loom, what kind
Sure.
is it and how big it is? Somebody was asking.
Yeah, you know, giant Maycomber. It's one of those old like workhorses. I never did get like a date. I should like send in the serial number and see when it was made. I got it third hand, I think. And I think it's like 52 inches wide and it's a 12 harness loom. And
Oh,
it's way
nice.
too much loom for me because honestly, like these days, I only use like 4 harnesses. And I
I
just
think a
like,
lot of people will say that. But you might, you know, if they're there if you need them, right? It's
I
always good to
know.
have them. They're there if you need them. That's
I
always
mean,
important.
yeah, I think that when I got it ages ago and I fell in love with weaving and I had saved up enough money at my first job and I was like, oh, I'm gonna get the biggest thing I can get. And you know, I didn't know they went for so cheap because they're just such heavy, giant beasts of looms, you know, but I've done really delicate things on it and I've made a piece out of like 22 cotton and like mohair that was 8 inches wide. So, you
Yeah.
know, you can put it to good use. It's just got to have a gentle hand with it.
Somebody wants to know what is behind you. It's over your left shoulder on the wall.
So this is a really old painting of mine when I realized I wasn't a painter.
It's
But
wonderful.
I love it and I've kept it ever since. And yeah.
Um, Somebody said, oh, Liz said, thank you for asking about her work with disabled students. It's so valuable. She said, I've done found projects with homeless children, such creative power, given the materials. Thank you, Vandy. So there you
Oh,
go. And someone else, and I want to mention this too, that they were talking about they love their Maycomber too. I love my Maycomber. And she just wanted to say that Eddie from Maycomber just passed last week. So kind of
yeah.
on him today with all of us Maycomber lovers.
Yeah, it was so sad to hear. I
I
hadn't
know.
had a chance to meet him, and I know, yeah, that we all found
Yeah,
out.
I know of him. Everybody knew of him, right? So
Yeah, yeah.
thank you for bringing that up. We appreciate that. So what would be your dream project? No
Oh,
money, don't have to worry about money or equipment or anything. What would you do?
oh, I don't even know. I don't understand how to work without limitations. I mean, if you give me money,
What do you mean nothing, no limitations? I gotta have some.
I'm gonna go on a trip. Like, I'm not gonna be weaving. I mean, I don't know. Um,
Uh,
I mean, it's such a good question, but I really don't know. I think I'd love to like spend time traveling and getting to know, like getting really into really rural areas where some of these weaving traditions still exist while they still exist. I think I'd do more like research and just kind of really like there's so much to learn.
yeah.
And like I have very little time here and very little access to like land and traditions of weaving. So I would, you know, go to India or China or South America to explore that. I do want to just correct the chat. I know this website,
Oh,
so I'm just gonna put my website in.
sorry,
Uh,
I didn't see that.
that's
That
okay.
isn't, there you go. That's better.
But okay.
All
Um,
right.
Thank you for that. But yeah, I love the idea of, I don't know, projects. And the other sadness is I just found out about Zephyr yarn, and Zephyr yarn is
I know. I heard that during spinning and weaving week. I'm like, what?
I know
They can't go away. I need them.
maybe my dream project would be to like buy a mill.
There you
Keep
go. Go buy
going.
them.
I
Keep them
know.
going.
That's sad.
Well, I guess our dreaming is going to have to continue off air because we got to stop today.
Mm.
Thank you so much. This was fun. It was
Yeah.
wonderful talking with you and seeing your work. And yeah, I encourage you to go to her website because you will be floored at the extent she has of just the different modalities. And I disagree with that. You're not a painter. I think you're wonderful. And just her use of color and design. Go look, it's well worth it. VandanaJain.net and go check it out. And thank you so much for joining us today. We really do appreciate it. We want to thank Dale Christie for being our sponsor. Dale, I hope you're seeing this and I hope you're happy. It was a great one to sponsor. We thank everyone for their sponsorships. And if you or your business or your guild would like to do a sponsorship, you can go online or you can give us a call and we'll help you set that up. We appreciate all of our sponsors that make these shows possible. If you want to support in a variety of ways, you can also join. You can go online and buy a membership. You can make a donation because those donations are what keep our programs going, whether it's Spinning and Weaving Week, Textiles and Tea, Careers in Textiles, all those different programs keep going through the generous donations and memberships of our folks. If you've missed an episode, you can go back and watch them. They're all on the HGA Facebook page. And you can also go to the YouTube channel. And I encourage you, if you rather watch YouTube than Facebook, subscribe, because when you do, then you'll get a notice that a new episode has been uploaded. It may take a week or so to get them all up. It takes a while to get those done. But if you would subscribe to our Facebook page, we appreciate it. Next week, we got someone everybody knows. Susie Lyles from Eugene Textiles is going to be on, and that'll be an interesting program. She's done everything, and I can't wait to talk to her and hear more. So thank you all so much for being with us today. We appreciate it. Hope you have a wonderful week and happy tea.